us that actually we may not know, because real knowledge is evidenced in our actions. If you can't see the result of knowledge in actions, that means we actually don't know. I've just presented myth number 1. That money brings happiness. Myth number 2. Technology brings well-being. Is it so that our technologically complicated lives are actually better in terms of freedom from anxiety, freedom from stress? We seem to have bought very deeply into the money goals, the technology goals. And that brings us to myth number 3. Perhaps that myth is not as prevalent in South Africa as other places. Still, myth number 3 has a major impact in the whole world. Weapons bring security. In some revered nations of the world, at least 50% of the government's revenue is spent on the military. And the taxpayers are convinced all this military spending is for the security and protection of humanity. Myth number 4. The earth provides virtually unlimited resources for our exploitation. And then, the 5th myth, the earth provides limitless room for disposal of waste after we've done our exploitation. These myths are punctured these days, but what are we going to put in their place? Unless we have a deep spiritual understanding of what the self is, we'll never be able to escape these material traps. Economics, politics, these are necessary. But we've come to a time when the greatest concepts of material life are shaky. Not simply capitalism, but the whole idea of economic growth as a cherished destination. And then, democracy. You may have seen a few weeks ago a special report in The Economist magazine. The Economist magazine, published in the UK, distributed around the world, is known to be the party line for so many news publications throughout the world. In that special report about democracy, the social scientists contributing to the report said, we have to be honest, democracy is in trouble. The 20th century was the great peak of democratic motivation. The fall of the Soviet Empire, the fall of apartheid, brought such feelings of exhilaration. But as we go into the 21st century, according to political studies, for the past 8 years, democracy has been receding in the world. There are two main causes for that. These causes are important for us to understand because so many of our concepts of freedom are tied to the democratic process. Hundreds upon hundreds of years ago, Plato pointed out that the Achilles heel of democracy is that the people can easily be bought off by populist proposals which just focus on short-term gains, short-term stimulations. The Economist magazine admitted Plato had it right. What has upset the apple cart? The global financial crisis. Democracy could not prevent that. It could not reform the banking system. But there's an even greater reason. China. China is showing that what is important is not freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of thought. What is important is growth, economic growth achieved by any means. When America was at its economic maximum, for it to double the standard of living took 30 years. China does that every 10 years. And their leaders are now quite upbeat. What is all this talk about freedom? Where's your economic growth? Look at our example. We have a tightly controlled society run by professional managers. We decide what's good for the people. You go to China, you'll see gleaming airports, brand new highways, super fast transport system. People are thinking in the world, this is what we want. We want the fruits of rapid economic acceleration. We can do without the freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of thought. We can do without that if we have the temporary stimulations that an advanced consumer society can give. What can we say to that? If the goal is rapid economic acceleration, if that is what will satisfy the human being, then let us do whatever is necessary to get that. If prosperity is more important than freedom, then we should restructure our political economies. The Chinese are saying, this is the way. What is the use of your democratic systems? Their leaders openly say that. You elect incompetent leaders. You elect sweet talkers. Look at us. We assemble the brightest, most competent people, and we tightly control society. Look what we're able to provide the people. Look at our standard of living and how rapidly it increases. I point this out because what we're seeing is a misguided, mistaken understanding of what is best for the human being. Forgetting our non-material identity, we are struggling to seek fulfillment through matter. Sentimentally, we may talk about our spirituality, our spiritual self, but where is the precise scientific knowledge of the spirit soul? In the prime Vedic text, Bhagavad Gita, Krishna presented as the supreme absolute truth, the supreme source, the ultimate reality, says that as long as we think we are matter, as long as we have no precise understanding of our spiritual identity, we must be subject to illusion. Our efforts for progress must be thwarted because we actually don't know that our number one priority is enlightenment. Where will we find the most comprehensive spiritual knowledge that can re-equip humanity with proper goals in life? Yes, we must take care of our material needs. And certainly, there has been great injustice in the distribution of economic opportunity. There's been great injustice in terms of political, while taking care of those, dare I say, external priorities. We have forgotten how powerful our spirit soul is. And we have forgotten our connection to the Supreme Soul. Unless we have a class of leaders that can uplift the people with spiritual knowledge, you'll always see society declining. Despite so many revolutions, so many elections, so many restructurings of the political economy, you'll see that actually not much changes. There seems to be a potential for change. There's a great hope. And yes, in terms of the externals, there is adjustment. But then, again and again, the people become disappointed. Often political change means the ins become the outs become the ins. Is there a way we can focus on the real needs of the human being? Perhaps we become distracted. I'd like to present to you a possible way we can visualize the supreme absolute truth in our daily life. 5 levels. 3 are just about material nature, ordinary material existence. But 2 are transcendental, meaning beyond matter, beyond time and space. The point I'll make is that without a grasp of the top 2 levels of the 5, we cannot actually properly benefit humanity. Humanity is actually not free. The first level, in the Sanskrit language, you see, Sanskrit is a language particularly appropriate for discussions of enlightenment. Every language has its forte. English is the business language. German is still known as the scientific language, especially for engineering. French supposedly is the language of love. Sanskrit is the language of the spiritual science. So therefore, I'll present a few Sanskrit terms, but I'll describe them. The first level of our experiencing the presence of the Supreme in our life is called Annamaya. Realization of God based on food. The fact that I'm being maintained, I can eat, there's food for me. It's a very preliminary realization of God. We cannot actually maintain ourselves. We don't control nature, despite our technology. Someone who appreciates the Supreme simply because he or she can eat. Although that's rudimentary, it is still noteworthy. You may hear persons say, "Food on my table, I know God is able." That is correct. It's the beginning, the very beginning of God realization. I'm reminded of a commendation that the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization spoke upon the passing of Nelson Mandela. They complimented him for understanding that so much of freedom depends on food. Not simply in growing food, but the distribution of food. So this first level of God realization, Annamaya, is indeed important. We can't live without food. Yet the UN has calculated that 1/3 of all the food produced in the world is wasted. 1.3 billion metric tons annually. In the UK alone, of all the fruits and vegetables grown in the UK, 30% is wasted because of cosmetic reasons. The fruits and vegetables don't look good enough for the consumers. If we have so much trouble on the first level of God realization, how can we proceed any further? Think of the little baby being nursed at his or her mother's breast. The child, the baby, is simply focused on being fed. So much of the world has problems just eating. There are 1 billion people in the world